Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything, football, the NBA, college basketball, the NHL, the UFC, and other MMA events. Head to betonline.ag today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is proud to partner with Illumination Brewing for another season of crafting State IPA, the perfect tailgate and game day beer for Penn State football fans. State IPA is available now, but it won't last much longer. Check in with your local beer distributor, grocery store, plus select bars and restaurants. Visit illuminationbrewing.com/beer/state-IPA to learn more. Must be 21 years or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. All right, this weekend, Penn State's final road test of the regular season goes down in Minneapolis. The number 4 Penn State Nittany Lions go to visit the Minnesota Golden Gophers. That'll be at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Penn State, this is their last real big-time scary test of the season. I know there are plenty of Penn State fans that feel confident going into this game, justifiably so, considering the momentum they have built ever since the loss to Ohio State and looking at what Minnesota is on paper. This is a winnable game for Penn State. The spread right now, according to our friends at BetOnline, is in favor of Penn State by -12.5 at the time of this recording. So right now, Penn State had every reason to feel confident heading into this game. But Justin, it's just a situation where you're on the road in the Big Ten. This is a team that people could say what they want about USC, but Minnesota surprised USC in Minneapolis a number of weeks ago and got a victory just before Penn State had played them, if I'm not mistaken. So this is not exactly a gimme. How do you feel about this game from the outside looking at it?
I mean, you got to take care every week like it's a new week, right? Winning is the most important thing in this current landscape. I mean, as long as we continue to win, we can continue to hold our own destiny in our hands. So they're going to be well coached. I mean, I'm not going to say upset alert, but you're going to their home field and, you know, historically, you know, PJ Fleck has his teams ready to play. So, I mean, come out with a win, keep moving forward. That's my whole mentality for the rest of this season.
Penn State right now sits at 9-1. You have Minnesota 6-4, 4-3 in the conference. So Minnesota is going to be wanting to continue to keep pace. Here's the interesting thing, Justin, about this. And the statistics don't always tell the entire story, but sometimes they're worth glancing at. This Minnesota team is 17th in the country in points allowed defensively. They're one of the better defenses against the pass. They've permitted less than 200 yards passing per game, roughly 120 yards rushing per game. It's been a sneaky good Minnesota team this year. And then also the really interesting thing is that when you look at this from a statistical standpoint, Minnesota and Penn State's marquee offensive players have eerily similar numbers. Drew Aller, 71% completion percentage. Brosmer is somewhere in the neighborhood of 67%. Both of them almost identical, 2,250 yards passing. Brosmer, 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Aller, 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And then the two primary leading rushers between the two teams, Penn State's Katron Allen, 139 carries for 64 yards and 5 touchdowns. Darius Taylor, 136 carries, 672 yards, however, 9 touchdowns, and he's contributed quite a bit in the passing game. Darius Taylor is kind of the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak. Then in terms of the receiving game, we all know about Tyler Warren. I want to get into the Heisman conversation about Warren here in just a bit. Warren so far, 67 catches for 808 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's just remarkable for a tight end. He's setting all sorts of records. The leading receiver is actually a wide receiver for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. No shade against Penn State, but we get it. 63 receptions, 712 yards, and 3 touchdowns for Daniel Jackson. Minnesota does have a good amount of receivers that they can get the ball to, and Brosmer, their quarterback, has been better as the season has gone on. So it's kind of funny how those numbers look so similar. You just kind of change out the name and the logo and the player, and there's a lot of similarities between these two teams. From what Minnesota has done offensively through the season, what impresses you, and what do you think Penn State has to look out for?
I mean, I think they just play all around solid football game, right? They're efficient running the football, make the plays that are needed on the outside. So, I mean, I think from just the totality of a team, I think that's their greatest advantage. I don't think they do anything just remarkable, to be completely honest. It's just a well put together team. And when that happens, you have to special players have to dominate that Penn State does have, right? Got to see a big game from Drew, got to see a big game from Abdul, some turnovers in the secondary, and make things happen, because I don't think Minnesota's not going to make just a bunch of dumb mistakes. So you're going to have to take it to them to get them out of character a little bit and, get out of there with a W.
The thing I always love to hear your perspective on is that you're going to Minneapolis on November 23rd. It's projected to be 37 degrees out. It's a 3:30 p.m. Eastern kick, so 2:30 p.m. Central. It's going to get colder there towards the back end of the game. I know you hated playing in the cold. These Big Ten matchups, like this feels like a traditional Big Ten matchup, the way that these two teams are schematically and the way that their personnel play out. How do you start to handle that thing as you get later into November, the weather element as well?
Talk about mental toughness, right? It's toughness from the coaching, understanding that from the players of like, hey, we have a job to attend to and can't worry about the weather. It's easier said than done. Like I'm telling you, do not like that cold. And when we played in Minnesota, they had an indoor. So we played at the
yes. Oh, 1,000 years ago. I remember that.
Now that you say that, but like outside of Minnesota,
there's been some nightmare situations recently for Penn State at Minnesota. Didn't go their way or lost.
100%.
We could just call it that, but like
100%. So I mean, that goes into even just the overall theme of the game, where you just got to take full advantage of what's going on and capitalize. Because, yeah, when it's cold, you're away, and well-coached team, you just don't want anything to be closer than it needs to be. But yeah, I hate the cold weather.
You've made that very clear in the life of this podcast. For Minnesota defensively, to your point, this is an intelligent football team. PJ Fleck, he traditionally puts out a disciplined, intelligent defensive approach. So I do expect them to maybe attempt to mimic some of the things that Ohio State did to take away Penn State's offense. Purdue had no chance against that. It was such a personnel deficiency, like we talked about a recap episode, is that there's very little to have taken away from that Purdue game, because you saw Purdue try and go zone to try and limit some things, and that just opened the door. That opened the floodgates. Andy Kolonicki had a field day. Do you expect Minnesota to do what Ohio State did, double Tyler Warren, play man, stuff the box?
If they have the personnel to do it, I think that's the game plan to roll out. It always becomes a difficulty when you have glaring mismatches other places, right, that you can take full advantage of, the one-on-ones from the outside. If they can do that and, now challenge the receivers, I think this is a little different secondary than Ohio State or even some of those other teams had. But if they do that, I think it's risky but necessary, and it puts the onus back on the perimeter players of Penn State, who have been I would say the most inconsistent throughout the season, if you want to throw in the running backs, but that all kind of trickles from one area to another. But yeah, I think that's the way that you approach it, and just hopefully the outside receivers and Drew, and the offense kind of gets rolling from the like just a spacing standpoint and attacking just the open field to be able to get them out of that, attack man type of situation.
You mentioned the running backs. We weren't able to have you for the recap of the Purdue game. Nick Singleton last week, James Franklin said he's out with a short-term injury. I honestly don't know what the hell that means anymore, because he says some guys are out with a long-term injury. KJ Winston, Peter Gonzalez are good examples. We haven't seen them in a minute. I have no expectation or heard any rumblings that we're going to get them back anytime soon. And then a short-term injury from Nick Singleton coming off the Washington game where he exited about the middle of the third quarter. About 2 days later, he was in practice. So that was short-term. So it's like, what's going on with Nick? What did you see out of Singleton in the game against Purdue?
I mean, normal Nick kind of running, you know what I mean? Like some hard running, but it just didn't have any creases to kind of bust loose. But no, he didn't look injured per se. I mean, he looked like he ran like a tough nosed football player, found his openings that he did and put his nose down and try to get north and south. And that's what you want from a running back, right? That level of predictability and still having the ability to make those big plays, right? But nothing too much out of the ordinary. Again, it's kind of hard to tell when you're playing a team of a lesser ilk than you are. So that's where it kind of gets tricky with that evaluation.
Also, coming off the Purdue game, we saw a lot of the depth from Lockdown U. Obviously, the backups were getting in towards the back end of the third quarter and quite a bit there in the fourth quarter. Jalen Reed got dinged. Tyrese Mills got dinged, but came back into the game ultimately. Were you happy with what you saw from the depth of Lockdown U? Because we did see a lot during the second half, both sides of the ball. James Franklin was obviously trying to get his depth out there and then taking a look at some of these guys like, hey, like he was coaching it hard as he should have been.
No, you have to. I mean, again, you have to deal with injuries late in the season. And you have to make sure that the players that are there, whether it's getting them snaps in the game to where they're happy and, that talent management piece, but then you also need to build depth. Injuries happen, 100% injury rate. Guys have to be ready to play, especially in critical moments. And you have to know what artillery looks like, right, moving forward. And that comes from having a depth of players that you can trust and believe that they can perform when the red light comes on. Because it's always one thing when you're in spring ball, you can ball out or in practice. It's a completely different thing when you're playing in front of 75 to 100,000 people and the crowd is going, are you getting the checks? Do you actually know the defense? So you have to put players in those real game-like situations. I think James has done a great job with that. Through his tenure here in terms of building depth when guys are able to step in, they're above the line and ready to perform.
Speaking of depth, a lot of depth at the tight end position, as we saw against Purdue. Luke Reynolds getting in there at the end, scoring a touchdown. Very excited about that. Luke Reynolds clearly has a lot of ability. Khalil Dinkins got in there a good amount. Tyler Warren did something that hadn't been done in major FBS football since 2019, leading the team in receiving yards and rushing yards as a tight end. And that mark that was accomplished in 2019 wasn't even close to what Tyler Warren did. Now, granted, you look at the level of competition, that's just a bad Purdue football team. So it's really hard to pick it apart. But Tyler Warren, in my opinion, should at least get an invitation to New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. You know me from professional wrestling, my tinfoil hat goes on a little bit. I found it odd how most of the major sports media outlets this past weekend, it seemed like everybody got an email and it was like, say Travis Hunter is the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman, and we'll back it up with the gambling platforms that will reinforce that. And boy, were we wrong about Colorado. And look at how good Colorado is. And I was like, it doesn't feel to me like there's one clear-cut favorite for the Heisman right now. It just seems like the media is like, we talk about Travis Hunter a lot. He's a star. He obviously gets attention and ratings, so you might as well give it to him. But I was like, there's two unicorns in college football, and it's Travis Hunter and it's Tyler Warren. I don't think Warren's going to win it. For a tight end to win it would take astronomical numbers between now and when they do award the Heisman Trophy. Like, he would have to do some insane things, not to say that he hasn't already. But I just find it funny that it's like, oh, we've just decided it's Travis Hunter, even though he only has, I think, 9-10 touchdowns receiving. And yes, he plays a ton of snaps, but I was like, look at what Tyler Warren is doing. It's unreal.
Yeah, the power of media, right? I mean, of course, Travis been playing some good football, and they, like you said, they've been playing on national TV every single week with a lot of hype around what's going on from the media standpoint. But even from that, yeah, Tyler's been doing some special things from a tight end position, right? Like having the most rushing yards and receiving yards, things that haven't been done in a couple years. Um, I'm always up in the air about the Heisman. I mean, it seems like the criteria changes every year, how people vote, and so it's hard for me to say like, oh, who should have a pick or who shouldn't be there. And I think Tyler has deserved to go at least to a New York as one of the top 5 guys for the Heisman Trophy winner, for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. And but even to like the Travis Hunter thing, I do agree with you. He's been doing things in spot areas where it's like, wow, like yes, he should be the number 1 overall pick. He should be a top 3 draft pick, like all those different type of things. But I don't know what the criteria is about the Heisman. Is it the best player? Is it the most electrifying player on the best team?
Most outstanding player is what they say.
So like when you say that, it's you know, yeah, he has. Travis has been doing some pretty special things, right? And I think that's an easy thing to point out. And he's been doing like the Heisman celebration. So like closed mouths don't get fed, right? And I think Penn State is trying to highlight some more, I guess, unique aspects of Tyler Warren with the graphics and put him in different situations where he can run the football. He can have those unique stats that catch the casual fan that boils the media trains to say like, hey, this guy's the guy versus this guy's the guy, right? And yeah, I guess when it comes to the Heisman, I think Tyler should definitely be there, but who wins? I don't know.
Oh, no, it's not necessarily looking for that. I just think Tyler has done enough in terms of what his overall versatility is, like to be up for the Maxwell, to be up for the Horning. 100%, the Horning Award going to the most versatile player. It's really hard to argue that there's somebody more versatile than what he is. The Mackey Award, excuse me, not the Maxwell. The Mackey Award for best tight end, I think it's between him and Bowling Green's Harold Fannin, who Penn State fans got to see earlier on this year. You and I were singing his praises after that game. Tyler Warren just does more things than Harold Fannin Jr. does.
Right. I mean, you probably make the same argument again, not for like Travis Hunter, like the most versatile guy. Like, okay, how many? Like that's when that snap count can kind of come in. Like, but I don't know if the snap count reigns supreme in the Heisman Trophy celebration.
I mean, like, it's so funny because we're in this weird point in time where people will make an argument out of whatever it is they can find. Like he has 2 carries for 5 yards and 1 rushing touchdown, then 74 receptions for 911 yards and 9 touchdowns. So 10 offensive touchdowns. Defensively, obviously, he's been quite good and he's played a ton of snaps. He's got 3 interceptions on the year, 8 passes defensed. So it's like, all right, statistically, that's fine. Those are good numbers. It's all well and good. But
those are very good numbers. Those are
very good numbers. But are you? What's the comp? Is it Desmond Howard?
No, Charles Woodson. But he was also on the national championship winning football team. He was that guy on, number 1 team in the country. So I think that's the comp. And when you compare the stats of him being like a spot player, or even if you want to say like a Champ Bailey back in the day, like he didn't get this type of love, but he also didn't have that level of production on offense. So don't kill me, Champ Bailey fans, but he also played a lot of snaps and was extremely good. You know what I mean? So again, I don't know what the qualifications are for the Heisman because the most versatile player seems more like Travis Hunter, but the most outstanding player does seem like it can be a little up in the air across the board, especially when you start bringing in the quarterbacks and how these teams finish off at the end of the years. I mean, after the playoffs, like how do people actually perform in the playoffs? But I think it's going to be announced before that. So
it does get announced before the national championship game, at least. I am a big fan of doing it after the entirety of the season.
It should be.
Regular season, postseason is done. Let's base it on everything because we may make that decision and then all of a sudden, Jalen Milroe, the quarterback for Alabama, there was a point there where everybody's like, yeah, he's maybe the best athlete on the field at any given time, but the wins and losses and his inconsistent play of times have hurt him. So if he had a better season, it would have been there. Cam Ward, Miami had to go undefeated for him to really get into that conversation. And that's the whole issue now with the expanded college football playoff. Everybody's doing, well, Indiana's 10-0, but they've beaten 7 of the 8 worst teams in the Big Ten, and they haven't played any of the top 7 teams in the Big Ten. They're about to play Ohio State this coming weekend, which is basically a Big Ten title eliminator game. And everybody's comparing resumes of like, well, Georgia's got 2 losses, but Indiana is undefeated. So like one should be here, one should be there. And it was like, you know that if you put these 2 teams on the field, Georgia would probably smash Indiana, would smash Colorado. BYU just lost to Kansas. BYU would get killed by them. What's the other one? Tulane is another team that's been in the mix. There's a bunch of these. Boise State. There's another one. Ashton Genty. Crazy stats. But then you look at the competition he's playing. It's like, you better run by all these guys. It's so hard to discern now because the talent has been spread out so much amongst college football, but there's no single means of comparing everybody to everybody else. So we're having all these biased arguments, and that you could be going down the street of the argument, and then it's like, I'll bow off and be like, well, he doesn't have that many, like Travis Hunter doesn't have wild defensive stats or anything, but he has great offensive stats. And I was like, what are we doing here? It's so complex now. It doesn't make any more sense.
3 picks, 8 pass breakups. That's a pretty good season for a corner.
It's a good season, but
better than good.
Better defensive years. So it's like, what are we doing? Like, and then you look at the competition in the Big 12. That's part of it.
Well, that's a big part. I think when you look at the competition in the Big 12, it still seems like a step below the top tier.
I'm doing it right now. I'm going off in cul-de-sacs of like, oh, well, what about this? So
yeah, no, it's all good.
I think Tyler Warren has done enough. He should get an invitation to New York. I expect Genty and potentially Cam Ward to get invitations. If they only pick 3, then I think Tyler Warren is going to be on the outside looking in just because he is a tight end. And that's the other tough part. And you know this about branding with everything you've done with Lockdown U, Penn State's defensive backs, the Lawn Boys, State's running backs, the Aces, Penn State's tight ends. That branding matters. And tight end is not sexy. Tight end doesn't feel like, oh, yeah, this is the most talked about player in the country by any means. It's star power versus performance. I don't know.
Substance versus package, right?
Important. So Penn State plays Minnesota this Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. In your opinion, Minnesota on the road and then at home against Maryland on Senior Day to round things out. If Penn State clears Minnesota, smooth sailing? Or are you still in the back of your head being like, it's Franklin, Loxley, Penn State, Maryland?
Every week you have to be ready to go. I still think, like, again, the Maryland football team is made up of a lot of players that Penn State probably didn't offer, or they were in that same area. They played against a lot of players that are on Penn State, and but there's like a personal aspect that comes with that. So you have to be ready to play and just beat them up the way they need to be beat up. But you got to, again, 1-0 each week. Take it to them this week. Take it to Maryland, finish it off, and let's see where this playoff goes.
Yeah, I know the record is much more in Franklin's favor than in Loxley's, but still, that personal history, I think, always makes that game interesting. The history between the two teams. I'll never forget the attempt at a handshake. I think it was 2014, and Maryland said no. So I'm getting ahead of myself. This Minnesota game isn't a gimme by any means. To have this as a road test, second to last week of the season in cold weather potentially, this doesn't feel like a gimme. Very winnable game, but still Minnesota can get you.
For sure.
Penn State versus Minnesota this Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Thank you all so much for tuning in to State of State. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications, get at us on social media at State of State Pod, get in our comment section on YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel by hitting the join button on our homepage or following the link in the description of this podcast. You can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free, for just 99 cents a month. It's the gift that keeps on giving with the holiday season right around the corner. Enjoy Penn State versus Minnesota this Saturday. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, let us know what you think of the show on social media and check out all of our content on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for the handle @StateOfStatePod. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.